6 months after the destruction of the Kethran Horde, the galaxy was beginning to understand what had happened. News traveled slowly through the vast distances of space, but it traveled nonetheless. Species that had lived in fear of the Kethran conquest realized that the threat had been eliminated. More importantly, they learned how it had been eliminated. A small group of humans working together with the peaceful Threlians had defeated an enemy that many had thought was unstoppable. The message was clear to every civilization that heard it. There was hope. There was a way to resist tyranny. There was a force in the galaxy that was willing to answer the call for help. On the human colony world of New Athens, Commander Jacob King stood in the central plaza, watching the news broadcast on the public screens. The broadcast showed footage of the battle, of human soldiers fighting beside Threlian defenders, of the destruction of the Kethran command ship. The crowd around him watched in silence, many of them with tears in their eyes. Jacob thought about the decision the council had made to send the strike force. He thought about all the people who had doubted the mission would succeed. He thought about Captain Helena Price and her team, out there in space changing the course of galactic history. A young woman approached him. Her name was Sarah, and she was a cadet at the military academy. She said, "Sir, I want to join the Space Forces. I want to be like Captain Price. I want to help protect people who cannot protect themselves." Jacob looked at her carefully. He saw determination in her eyes. He saw the same fire that burned in Helena Price. He said, "Then you will need to train harder than you have ever trained before. You will need to study tactics and strategy. You will need to learn to make difficult decisions. You will need to understand that protecting people means being willing to sacrifice for them." Sarah nodded. She understood. Back on the Threlian homeworld, the military academy that Lieutenant Marcus Webb had established was overflowing with students. Threlian soldiers, yes, but also representatives from other species that had heard about what humans could teach them. A young Velthian, a species of crystalline beings that communicated through vibrations, asked Marcus about human military philosophy. Marcus said, "It is not just about tactics and strategy. It is about understanding that every decision you make affects lives. Every order you give sends people into danger. Every battle you fight has a cost. A good commander never forgets that cost. A good commander never becomes comfortable with sending people to their deaths even when it is necessary." The Velthian vibrated in a way that Marcus had learned meant understanding. The student said, "You make it sound like warfare is a burden rather than a glory." "It is," Marcus said. "War is a burden. War is something that has to be done to protect what matters. But it should never be something that anyone enjoys or celebrates. The day a soldier celebrates killing, that soldier has lost something important. That soldier has become something less than human." Engineer Alice Foster was teaching in the Joint Technology Facility. Her radiation burns had healed, but they had left scars. She wore them openly, without shame. She was showing a group of Threlian engineers how to integrate human-style modular weapon systems with Threlian precision engineering. She said, "The beauty of human engineering is that we build things fast and we build them to be repaired. We build things that can be modified and upgraded. Threlian engineering is about building things perfect the first time. But what we need now is something new. We need to build things that are both perfect and adaptable. We need to create weapons that are beautiful and deadly." One of the older Threlian engineers said, "Is it not wrong to create such things? To make weapons more perfect and more deadly?" Alice stopped working. She looked at the engineer carefully. She said, "It is wrong to create weapons for conquest. It is wrong to create weapons to dominate others. But it is right to create weapons that protect the innocent. It is right to create weapons that can stop tyranny. The weapon itself is not evil or good. What matters is the intention behind it and the purpose it serves." Dr. Raymond Cole was working with a group of soldiers, both human and Threlian, who were struggling with trauma from the battle. One human soldier, a man named Daniel, could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the Kethrans he had killed. Daniel said to Raymond, "I do not feel like a protector. I feel like a killer. I feel like I have done something terrible." Raymond listened carefully. He said, "You did kill. That is true. You killed soldiers who would have killed you and your allies. You killed enemies of peace and freedom. That does not make you a killer in the way you mean it. That makes you a soldier. That makes you someone who was willing to do a terrible thing, so that worse things would not happen. That is the burden that soldiers carry. It is a heavy burden. It will never go away completely, but you can learn to carry it. You can learn to live with it, and you can find meaning in what you did, Daniel cried. He cried for the first time since the battle, and when he was finished crying, something in him felt lighter, as if some of the weight had been removed. Dr. Fiona Hayes was working on something different. She was developing a doctrine for how multiple species could work together in military situations. She was creating training programs, tactical manuals, and strategic guidelines. But more than that, she was creating a philosophy of combined species warfare. She said in one of her lectures, when different species work together in military situations, they have to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. But more than that, they have to understand each other's values and cultures. A species that values honor might make different tactical choices than a species that values survival. A species that communicates through sound might use different signals than a species that communicates through light. But all of these differences can be strengths if you understand them, and work with them instead of against them. News was spreading through the galaxy about the human alliance. More and more species were requesting military advisors. More and more worlds were asking for help establishing their own defense forces. Captain Helena Price was receiving dozens of requests each week from distant parts of space, but there were also warning messages. Reports came back of other Kethran remnants, scattered fleets that had survived the main battle. There were whispers of other aggressive species, other predatory civilizations that saw the destruction of the Kethran horde as an opportunity to expand their own territory. The galaxy was not becoming peaceful. It was becoming complicated. The destruction of the Kethran horde had removed one threat, but it had not solved the fundamental problem of how different species with different values and ambitions could coexist. Captain Helena Price called a meeting with Supreme Counselor Vareth and her team. They sat in a conference room aboard the HMS Sovereign, which now served as the flagship of the combined human Threlian defense force. Helena said, "We have won one battle, but we have not won the war for peace. There are other threats out there, other species that believe might makes right. We need to be prepared for a long conflict. We need to be ready to answer calls for help from across the galaxy." Varath said, "This is what you envisioned when you said we should become protectors rather than hunters. You are saying that we have a responsibility now. A responsibility to stand against tyranny wherever it appears." "Yes," Helena said. "That is exactly what I am saying. And it is a responsibility that will never end. There will always be threats. There will always be powers that want to dominate others. But if we are willing to answer those calls, if we are willing to stand against tyranny, then there is hope." Marcus Webb said, "Then we need to expand. We need to recruit more soldiers. We need to train more officers. We need to build more ships." "We do," Helena said, "but we need to do it carefully. We cannot become like the Kethran horde. We cannot become predators ourselves. We have to maintain our principles. We have to remember that we fight to protect, not to conquer." Alice Foster added, "And we need to share what we know. We need to help other species develop their own defense capabilities. We cannot be the protectors of the entire galaxy. No single force can do that, but we can teach others how to protect themselves." Over the next several months, the alliance expanded. More species joined. More military academies were established. More joint technology programs were created. The Human Threlian Alliance was becoming something larger than anyone had initially envisioned. It was becoming a force dedicated to preventing conquest, to stopping tyranny, to protecting the innocent across the galaxy. In the capital city of the Threlian homeworld, a monument was being constructed. It would honor the soldiers who had died defending the planet, but it would honor something else too. It would honor the moment when different species realized they could work together. It would honor the moment when the Deathworlders had answered the call and shown the galaxy what was possible. Captain Helena Price stood at the construction site and watched the workers building the monument. It was beautiful. It was powerful. It was a symbol of everything that humans and Threlians had accomplished together. She thought about what lay ahead. She thought about the threats that were still out there in the darkness of space. She thought about all the species that might call for help in the years to come. The battle ended not with a sudden moment of peace, but with a gradual realization that the Kethrans were no longer attacking. Some ships retreated. Some surrendered. Some simply stopped moving, their crews destroyed or demoralized. By the afternoon of the second day, The Kethran horde had ceased to exist as a unified force. What remained were scattered remnants, isolated ships running toward the edges of the system, their crews desperate to escape. Captain Helena Price stood on the bridge of the HMAS Sovereign and watched the sensor displays. The displays showed her something she had not expected to see. They showed victory. They showed survival. They showed that the impossible had become possible. The cost of victory became clear over the next few hours. The human strike force had lost 47 soldiers. 47 people would not be going home. Their families would receive notification. Their friends would mourn them. The Threlian forces had lost 932 soldiers. These numbers seemed small compared to the millions of Threlians saved, but each number represented a life ended, a potential ended, a future that would never happen. Captain Helena Price could feel the weight of those numbers. She had ordered these people into battle. Their deaths were, in some sense, her responsibility. But she also knew that without their sacrifice, the Kethran horde would have conquered the entire Threlian coalition. Without their deaths, millions more would have died. In the medical bay of the HMAS Sovereign, Dr. Raymond Cole worked with the medical staff to treat the wounded. There were hundreds of them. Some would recover quickly. Some would carry scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. Some would die despite all the medical technology at their disposal. Cole moved from bed to bed, speaking quietly with each wounded soldier. He did not tell them that everything would be okay. He did not lie to them. Instead, he told them the truth. He said that they had been brave. He said that they had done something important. He said that their sacrifice had saved millions of people. He said that what they had done would be remembered. Engineer Alice Foster was recovering in the medical bay herself. She had received severe radiation burns and suffered from acute radiation poisoning. The doctors were not sure she would live. But Alice kept asking about the Threlian battlecruiser. She wanted to know if the weapons had worked. She wanted to know if the power rerouting had made a difference. When they told her that the ship had survived and that her actions had saved dozens of lives aboard that vessel, Alice smiled. Then she closed her eyes and let the medication take her into sleep. Dr. Fiona Hayes spent hours analyzing the battle data. She was compiling a detailed report on what had worked and what had not worked. She was identifying every tactical decision, every strategic choice, every moment where things could have gone differently. The report would be studied by military academies for generations. It would become the foundation for how combined species warfare was conducted. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was standing in the river valley where his unit had made their stand. The valley was scarred and blackened. Bodies lay where they had fallen, both human and Kethran. Marcus walked through the battlefield and spoke to each wounded soldier. He thanked them. He thanked them for their courage. He thanked them for their discipline. He thanked them for their willingness to stand against impossible odds. One young Threlian soldier, a female named Lissa, who had lost her entire family in the initial invasion, approached Marcus. She had tears in her eyes. She said, "We could not have done this without you, without your people, without your strength and your courage." Marcus looked at her carefully. He said, "You did this. Your people did this. Yes, we fought beside you. Yes, we helped you. But the will to resist, the determination to survive, that came from you. That came from the Threlians. You learned to be warriors. You learned to fight for what you love. That is the real strength. That is what matters." 3 days after the battle ended, Captain Helena Price was transported to the surface of the Threlian homeworld. Her injuries had been treated, but the doctors had ordered her to rest. The walk from the landing site to the meeting place was long, but Helena insisted on walking instead of being carried. She wanted to see what they had saved. The Threlian homeworld was beautiful. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched by snow. Green forests covered much of the landscape. Rivers flowed with clear blue water. Cities stood on the horizon, intact and whole, because the people who lived there had refused to let them be destroyed. Supreme Counselor Vareth waited for her at the edge of the great capital city. The counselor was surrounded by representatives from all 3 Threlian species. Behind them were civilians, thousands of them, looking at the human captain with expressions of gratitude and wonder. Vareth stepped forward and bowed. He said, "We owe you everything, Captain Price. You have saved our people. You have given us back our future. Helena returned the bow, showing respect to the counselor. She said, "We did what was right. But now we need to talk about what comes next." They met in a grand chamber in the center of the capital city. The chamber was beautiful, decorated with art and sculpture that spoke of a civilization that valued beauty and peace. But now it was filled with soldiers and leaders discussing warfare and defense. Helena laid out a proposal. She said that humanity was willing to establish a permanent defensive alliance with the Threlian coalition. Human warships would remain in Threlian space. Human military advisors would help establish Threlian defense forces. But there was one condition. "What is that condition?" Vareth asked. "That this is not about revenge," Helena said. "That this is not about hunting down the remaining Kethran forces and destroying them completely. That this is about creating a defense system that protects the innocent and gives them the chance to live in peace." Vareth understood immediately. He said, "You want us to become protectors, not hunters. You want us to use our strength to defend, not to dominate others the way the Kethrans tried to dominate us." "Yes," Helena said, "that is the real lesson. That is what humans have learned over thousands of years of warfare. Strength is not about domination. Strength is about protection. Power is not about conquest. Power is about defending those who cannot defend themselves." Over the next weeks, the alliance between humanity and the Threlian coalition formalized. Lieutenant Marcus Webb established a military academy, where officers from all three Threlian species could learn modern combat tactics. Engineer Alice Foster, who had survived her radiation poisoning through determination and excellent medical care, established a joint technology development program. Human engineers worked alongside Threlian engineers, creating weapons and defense systems that combined human innovation with Threlian precision. Dr. Fiona Hayes created a combined strategic command that included both human and Threlian officers. She developed a doctrine of unified warfare that could be taught to other species who wanted to join the alliance. Dr. Raymond Cole remained on the Threlian homeworld, working with both human soldiers and Threlian citizens to help them process the trauma of the war. He established a center for psychological healing and training, where people could learn to move past their trauma and rebuild their lives. On the final day before the human fleet was scheduled to depart, Captain Helena Price stood with Supreme Counselor Vareth on the highest peak of the Threlian capital city. From this peak they could see the entire planet. They could see the cities and the forests and the rivers. They could see everything that had almost been lost. The twin suns of the Threlian system were setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. For several minutes neither of them spoke. They simply looked out at the beauty of what they had saved. Finally, Vareth said, "What will you tell your people about us? About what happened here?" Helena thought carefully before she answered. She said, "I will tell them that we found a people worth protecting. I will tell them that they learned to be strong without losing their compassion. I will tell them that when humanity stands with others against tyranny, when humans refuse to accept conquest, when we choose to use our strength to protect rather than to dominate, there is nothing that can stand against us," Vareth said. "And what will we tell our people about humanity?" Helena smiled. She said, "Tell them that we are the Deathworlders. Tell them that we came from a world of violence and danger. Tell them that this made us strong in ways other species are not strong. But tell them also that the same world, the same danger, taught us that there is nothing more valuable than protecting those you care about. Tell them that humans are not the strongest, but we are the most willing to stand against darkness. Tell them that we will answer if they call. Tell them that retribution is always available for those who would prey on the innocent." The sun dipped below the horizon. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in those stars humanity waited. Somewhere out there, other civilizations were discovering what it meant when the Deathworlders answered their call. The Kethran horde had thought they were unstoppable. They had thought that force and numbers were everything. They had thought that conquest was inevitable. They had underestimated what happens when a species that evolved on a death world chooses to fight for justice. The Kethran horde arrived at the Threlian homeworld with their entire remaining fleet. Sensor readings showed 347 ships of various sizes, carrying hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The Kethran commander, a massive creature named Zarthak, who had conquered more worlds than any other Kethran in living history, broadcast a message to the Threlian government. He said that they had 1 hour to surrender or face complete annihilation. He said that resistance was futile. He said that the Kethrans were unstoppable. Captain Helena Price did not respond with words. She responded with action. The human fleet moved into position. Every ship was in exactly the place Dr. Fiona Hayes had calculated it should be. The Threlian fleet spread out in coordinated formations, their ships gleaming in the light of the Threlian sun. Down on the planet below, Lieutenant Marcus Webb had positioned his ground forces in strategic locations. They were not many, only 5,000 soldiers total, but they were positioned to make the maximum impact. The Kethran attack began with overwhelming force. Weapons fire lit up the space around the Threlian homeworld. Asteroids were vaporized. 3 Threlian defense stations exploded in massive fireballs. The Kethran strategy was simple and direct. Attack from all angles at once. Overwhelm the defenders. Break through the defensive line and move to orbital bombardment of the planet itself. It would have worked against almost any other enemy. But Helena Price had anticipated this exact attack. She had predicted the exact patterns the Kethrans would follow. As the Kethran fleet spread out to attack on all fronts, they became vulnerable. Fiona Hayes had identified the weak points in their formation. She had found the places where their ships were most exposed. She had calculated exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Helena gave the order. Human ships moved with precision and speed that the Kethrans had not seen before. Instead of defending in a static line, the human fleet attacked. Fighter craft launched from the HMS Sovereign and moved in coordinated groups. Their pilots had trained for weeks on these exact maneuvers. They flew through gaps in the Kethran formation. They struck at ships that thought they were safe. They destroyed weapon systems and damaged shields. The Kethran commanders ordered their ships to reorganize, but by the time they began moving, the human forces had already dealt serious damage. 3 Kethran destroyers were crippled. 2 cruisers had lost most of their defensive capabilities. The Kethran formation was broken. On the surface of the Threlian homeworld, the battle was even more intense. Kethran troops descended in dropships, expecting to face disorganized resistance. Instead, they faced Marcus Webb's soldiers positioned on high ground, in fortified positions with overlapping fields of fire. The human soldiers fought with a discipline and coordination that the Kethran soldiers did not expect. For every human killed, 5 Kethran soldiers fell, but the Kethrans kept coming. They had numbers. They had firepower. They had the weight of their conquest history behind them. The human defensive line began to crack under the pressure. Marcus realized that they could not hold the current positions. He made a tactical decision that went against conventional military doctrine. He ordered a fighting withdrawal. Instead of trying to hold fixed positions, Marcus pulled his forces back in a coordinated retreat. But it was not a desperate flight. It was tactical. Every step back was planned. Every withdrawal was covered by overlapping fire. As the Kethran troops advanced, thinking they were winning, they were actually moving into ambush points that Marcus had prepared. Kethran soldiers fell by the hundreds. The human forces, though smaller in number, were killing Kethrans at a ratio of 5 or 6 to 1. Back in orbit, Captain Helena Price was injured by shrapnel from a near miss on the bridge of the HMAS Sovereign. Her arm was bleeding. Her uniform was torn, but she refused to leave the bridge. She refused to let anyone send her to medical. She continued to direct the battle, her voice steady and clear even through the pain. She said to Marcus over the communication system, "Hold the defensive positions at the river valley. Do not fall back any further." Marcus received the message in his field headquarters, a reinforced bunker deep underground. He understood what Helena was asking. He was asking Marcus to hold impossible ground against overwhelming numbers. He was asking Marcus to make a stand that might result in the death of everyone in his unit. Marcus looked at the soldiers around him. They were tired. They were bleeding. Some of them were terrified, but they were also determined. They understood what was at stake. They understood that their families, their people, their entire civilization depended on them holding this line. Marcus said, "We hold here. We do not move. We do not retreat. We hold this ground or we die here. That is the choice the Kethrans have given us. And I know what choice every single one of you will make." The soldiers cheered quietly. They moved into position at the river valley. They dug in. They prepared for the assault that was coming. Engineer Alice Foster was in the main engineering section of a Threlian battle cruiser when a Kethran missile hit their ship. The explosion was massive. The ship shook violently. Systems went dark. The main power core was damaged. Alice realized that without power, the ship would be helpless. The shields would fail. The weapons would not fire. The ship would be destroyed. She made a decision. She took a team of engineers down into the damaged section. Radiation levels were off the scale. The area was burning, but Alice calculated that if they could reroute power through an alternate system, they could get the main weapons back online for maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes was enough. Alice and her team worked with incredible speed and precision. Burns covered their bodies. The radiation was killing them slowly, but they kept working. They kept rerouting power. They kept pushing their bodies and their minds to the absolute limit. Then the main weapons came back online. Alice transmitted the coordinates to the weapon systems operators. They fired. A Kethran cruiser that had been preparing to destroy the Threlian battlecruiser was hit with a massive energy blast. The Kethran ship exploded. Dr. Raymond Cole was in a civilian shelter with thousands of Threlians who were terrified and traumatized. The shelter was shaking from impacts above. The ceiling was cracking. People were screaming. But Raymond moved through the crowd with absolute calm. He spoke to every person he could reach. He said the same thing over and over. He said that humans were up there fighting. He said that the Threlians had learned to be warriors. He said that they would survive this. His presence, his calm certainty, his faith that they would survive, spread through the shelter like a wave. The panic subsided. People held each other. People prayed. People believed. Above the planet, Dr. Fiona Hayes was in the tactical center of the command ship. She was watching every engagement, every battle, every fight happening simultaneously across multiple fronts. She was feeding information to Helena. She was predicting what the Kethrans would do next and suggesting counter-moves. She was fighting with her mind while others fought with their weapons. Fiona said to Helena, "They are committing more troops to the ground assault. If they break through at the river valley, they will have a direct path to the capital city." Helena said, "They will not break through. Marcus Webb will not let them." Marcus did not let them. The Kethran assault on the river valley was devastating. Wave after wave of Kethran soldiers threw themselves at the defensive positions. The human soldiers and Threlian soldiers fighting beside them killed hundreds of them. But the Kethrans kept coming. They were willing to accept casualties that would horrify any other military, but they were not willing to accept the kind of losses they were taking. As the sun set on the first day of the battle, the Kethran command realized something. For the first time in their entire history, they were losing. Not by a small margin. They were losing badly. The human defenders were killing Kethrans faster than the Kethrans could kill defenders. The Kethran commander, Zarthak, made a desperate decision. He ordered every remaining ship to focus all firepower on the human flagship. He would destroy Helena Price and the command structure. He would break the back of human resistance. The HMS Sovereign was hit by barrage after barrage of weapons fire. Shields overloaded. Hull sections were breached. Fires broke out in multiple sections. Helena felt blood run down her face. She felt the ship buckling around her. But she did not abandon the bridge. She did not retreat. She gave one final order. She said, "All human fighters focus on the Kethran command vessel. Destroy it. End this." The human fighter pilots, hearing their captain's order, executed the most dangerous maneuver they had ever attempted. They flew directly at the Kethran command ship through a hail of weapons fire. One by one, they fired their missiles. One by one, they died. But their missiles found their target. The Kethran command ship, the massive battleship that carried Commander Zarthak and his entire command staff, was hit by dozens of missiles. It exploded in a massive fireball. Without their commander, without their central coordination, the Kethran fleet began to break apart. Some ships retreated. Some continued fighting, but the organized invasion had ended. The unified assault was over. The defenders had won. The first engagement with the Kethran horde came faster than expected. A scout ship detected 3 Kethran destroyers moving toward a smaller Threlian settlement on the outer colony worlds. The settlement held about 200,000 civilians who had evacuated from larger cities. If the Kethrans reached them, they would be destroyed. Captain Helena Price made the decision instantly. She sent Lieutenant Marcus Webb with a strike team to intercept the Kethran ships. The battle lasted only 40 minutes. By the end of it, all 3 Kethran destroyers were crippled or destroyed. Not a single human soldier died, though several were injured. The Kethrin fleet commanders received reports of the engagement and seemed confused by what had happened. They had expected an easy victory. They had not expected coordinated resistance. They had not expected to lose. This was only the beginning. Over the next 10 days, humans and Threlians fought together in small skirmishes across the outer colonies. Each engagement taught the same lesson. The Kethrins were powerful, but they were not invincible. They were predictable. They followed patterns. And when someone refused to follow their rules, when someone fought in ways they did not expect, the Kethrins did not know how to respond. During one battle, Marcus Webb's unit was surrounded. The Kethrins had cut off their retreat route. The Kethrin commander believed he had them trapped. He signaled his forces to close in, but Marcus did not retreat. Instead, he ordered his team to split up and move through the enemy lines in small groups. The Kethrins, expecting a standard military response, were confused by soldiers moving in unpredictable patterns. By the time the Kethrin commander understood what was happening, Marcus's team had already passed through the lines, reached the civilian population, and guided them to safety. The Threlian soldiers who witnessed this began to understand something fundamental. Humans did not fight the way the galaxy expected soldiers to fight. Humans did not rely solely on power and force. Humans used intelligence, adaptability, and most importantly, an unwillingness to accept defeat. After the 10th day, with the main Kethrin fleet approaching the Threlian homeworld, Captain Helena Price arranged a private meeting with Supreme Counselor Vareth. They sat in a small garden aboard the flagship of the Threlian fleet. The garden was peaceful, filled with plants from Vareth's homeworld. It smelled like growing things in Earth. "Your people are remarkable," Vareth said. "We have studied your history. We know that you have experienced many wars, many conflicts, many periods of great suffering. But we did not understand what that meant until we saw your people in action." Helena nodded. She understood what Vareth was trying to say. She said, "You want to know why we fight so hard? Why we refuse to give up? Why we seem willing to face any danger?" "Yes," Vareth said. "Explain this to me. Help me understand." Helena looked out at the artificial garden. She thought about Earth, about her childhood, about everything that had made her the person she was. She said, "Every human alive carries DNA that comes from people who survived impossible things. My ancestors lived through ice ages where the temperature dropped so low that the world became a frozen wasteland. They had to hunt dangerous animals or starve. They had to compete with other humans for limited resources. They had to survive diseases that killed thousands. They had to live through wars and famines and disasters that would have destroyed weaker species." She paused, making sure Vareth understood. She continued, "That is not cruelty in my people. That is survival. Evolution chose the humans who could fight, who could adapt, who could refuse to accept defeat. But it also chose the humans who could protect others, who could show compassion, who could work together. We are not just warriors. We are warriors who care. We are fighters who protect. We are predators who chose to use our strength to defend rather than to dominate." Vareth's expression changed. He seemed to understand something he had not understood before. He said, "You do not fight because you love violence. You fight because you love what the violence protects." "Exactly," Helena said. "A human soldier will die to protect a stranger because protecting others is part of who we are. It is written into our genetic code. My ancestors survived because they were willing to sacrifice for their group. That trait is still in me. That trait is still in every human on this ship." Over the next few days, this understanding began to spread through the Threlian forces. The soldiers began to see themselves differently. They were not just defending their territory. They were defending their families. They were defending their culture. They were defending everything they loved. And when a human stood beside them, when a human was willing to die for that same purpose, something shifted inside them. Engineer Alice Foster was working in the engineering section of a damaged Threlian battlecruiser when she discovered something fascinating. The Threlian engineers had designed their systems with incredible precision and elegance, but they had not designed them for the kind of stress that warfare created. Alice showed them how to reinforce key sections, how to distribute power more efficiently, how to push the systems harder without breaking them. The Threlian engineers watched and learned. One of them, an older Threlian named Soren, asked Alice why she cared so much about helping them. Alice said, "Because what you have built is beautiful. What you have created matters. I will not let that be destroyed if I can do anything to stop it. That is what humans do. We protect what matters. Dr. Fiona Hayes was training a group of Thrillian tactical officers when she made a breakthrough in strategy. She showed them how to use deception, how to make the enemy think you were weak when you were actually strong, how to make them commit forces to one area while you attacked from another. The Thrillian officers absorbed this knowledge hungrily. They began to see warfare not as a simple contest of force, but as a game of intelligence and will. Dr. Raymond Cole was working with a Thrillian soldier who had been traumatized by the destruction of her home colony. Her name was Lissa. She had lost her entire family to the Kethran invasion. She could barely function. Raymond worked with her every day, teaching her breathing techniques, helping her process her grief and anger. One day, Lissa asked Raymond why he helped her when she was not even human. Raymond said, "Because you matter. Your life matters. Your pain matters. And helping you heal is just as important as any weapon we could build. Humans understand that healing is part of protection. Helping people recover is part of defending them." By the time the main Kethran fleet arrived at the Thrillian homeworld, something fundamental had changed. The Thrillians no longer saw themselves as victims waiting to be saved. They saw themselves as warriors fighting for their survival. They were not like humans, but they had learned something from humans. They had learned that there was strength in sacrifice. They had learned that there was power in refusing to give up. They had learned that sometimes, standing against impossible odds was the only right choice. The Kethran fleet commanders studied the battle formations arranged to meet them. They saw human ships at the center, Thrillian ships surrounding them. They saw disciplined soldiers, prepared defenses, coordinated strategy. They had conquered 12 worlds easily. This would be harder. The Kethran commanders did not yet understand why. They did not yet understand that they were facing something they had never encountered before. They were facing an enemy that had learned to fight from a species that never accepted defeat. They were facing humans and the beings the humans had trained. They were facing something that would not surrender, would not retreat, would not accept conquest. They were facing Retribution. The jump through hyperspace took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of constant motion, constant preparation, constant waiting. The crew of the HMS Sovereign used the time to check their weapons, review their plans, and prepare themselves mentally for what they were about to face. Captain Helena Price spent most of her time on the bridge, staring at the stars and thinking about all the ways things could go wrong. When they finally emerged from hyperspace near Thrillian space, the first thing they saw was destruction. Entire planets hung in the darkness like broken toys. Some of them still burned. Some showed the scars of weapon impacts. Some were simply gone, erased from the system completely. The asteroids and debris fields that replaced them were all that remained of thriving civilizations. Helena felt her stomach tighten. The reports had said the Kethran horde was devastating, but seeing it with her own eyes was different. This was not just military strategy. This was not just tactics and warfare. This was annihilation. This was the complete and utter destruction of everything a people had built. The Thrillian government had sent a welcoming delegation to meet the human fleet. Their ship was beautiful, sleek and elegant in design, but it looked fragile. It looked like something designed by beings who had never expected to fight. Supreme Counselor Vareth led the delegation. He was tall, with forearms and gentle eyes. He looked like something between an insect and a humanoid, with skin that had a faint purple sheen to it. When he spoke, his voice was soft and musical. "We are so grateful you have come," Vareth said as he stepped onto the bridge of the Sovereign. "We have studied your species. We knew from your history that you possessed certain qualities that might assist us. But seeing you in person, seeing the determination in your eyes, gives us hope that we might actually survive this." Helena shook his upper hand. The gesture was slightly awkward because Vareth had 4 arms and she only had 2, but the counselor understood the intent. She said, "We will do everything we can to help you, but I need to understand the situation completely. How many worlds have fallen? How many civilians have been lost? And most importantly, where is the Kethran horde now?" Vareth's expression grew darker. He led Helena to the tactical display. What she saw made her blood run cold. The Kethran horde had conquered 12 worlds already. The civilian casualties were in the hundreds of millions. The Kethran fleet was enormous, easily 4 times the size of the human strike force, and they were moving toward the Thrillian homeworld. By the calculations on the screen, the horde would arrive in 18 days. 18 days to prepare for an invasion. 18 days to train an alien civilization to fight for the first time in their history. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was already moving through the tactical possibilities. He stood in front of the display with his arms crossed, his eyes darting from point to point. He turned to Helena and said, "We cannot win a direct engagement with these numbers. They have more ships, more weapons, more firepower. A straight fight is suicide." "Then we do not fight straight," Helena said. "We fight smart." "What are the Kethran weaknesses?" Marcus pulled up more data. He showed Helena records of previous Kethran battles, encounters with other civilizations. As he studied the patterns, he began to see something. The Kethrans were predictable. They attacked in standard formations. They relied on overwhelming force. They did not adapt quickly to unexpected situations. They did not innovate. They conquered through superior numbers and superior firepower, and that was all they knew how to do. "They have never fought an opponent who thinks like us," Marcus said. "They have never faced someone willing to break the rules of conventional warfare." Engineer Alice Foster joined the conversation. She had been studying the Threlian technology, understanding how their ships worked, how their weapons functioned. She said, "Their ships are better than ours in many ways, but they are not designed for heavy combat. They are designed for precision. If we can integrate human engineering principles with their technology, we might be able to create something neither species could build alone." Dr. Raymond Cole was walking through the detention areas where they were holding Kethran prisoners from a border skirmish. He spoke with each one, learning about their psychology, their motivations, their fears. When he came back to brief the team, he had interesting news. The Kethrans were not invulnerable. They could be afraid. They could doubt themselves. They had never encountered an opponent that refused to surrender, refused to give up, refused to accept defeat. Dr. Fiona Hayes began developing a combined strategy. She worked with Marcus on tactical formations. She worked with Alice on engineering modifications. She worked with Virath on how to position Threlian forces effectively. She was creating a doctrine, a way of fighting that combined human adaptability with Threlian precision. Over the next week, the human forces trained intensively with Threlian soldiers. The Threlians were not natural warriors. Many of them had never even held a weapon before, but they were intelligent. They learned quickly, and they fought with a quiet desperation because they were defending their own worlds, their own families, their own homes. Marcus Webb worked personally with the Threlian ground forces. He taught them that fear was not weakness. Fear was preparation. Fear made you alert. Fear made you focused. When you felt fear, that was your body telling you to be ready, and readiness was what kept soldiers alive. Alice Foster integrated human weapon systems with Threlian ships. She modified targeting computers, upgraded power distribution systems, and increased shield capacity. The Threlian engineers watched and learned, understanding that there were different ways to approach the same problems. Fiona Hayes taught Threlian officers about misdirection, about feints and false attacks, about making the enemy think you were doing one thing while you were actually doing something completely different. The concept was new to them, but they grasped it quickly. Dr. Cole worked with traumatized Threlian civilians. He helped them understand that what they were experiencing was normal, that fear was a survival mechanism, that their bodies and minds were preparing them for action. He taught breathing techniques, meditation practices, ways to calm the nervous system while maintaining alertness. As the days passed, something remarkable happened. The Threlians began to change, not into humans, but into something new. They were becoming warriors without losing their essential nature as peaceful beings. They were learning to fight without becoming violent. They were learning to defend without becoming aggressive. They were learning that there was a difference between protecting what you loved and conquering what you did not understand. On the 15th day, the scouts reported that the Kethran horde had been spotted entering the system. They were exactly where the calculations had predicted, exactly where Fiona Hayes had anticipated they would be. Helena stood on the bridge of the Sovereign and looked at her gathered team. Marcus was ready. Alice had completed the modifications. Fiona had finalized the battle plans. Cole had prepared the people as best anyone could prepare them. "Tomorrow we fight," Helena said. "Tomorrow we show the galaxy what it means to face a species that refuses to surrender. Tomorrow we show them that the Deathworlders are not just weapons. We are guardians. We are protectors. We are the ones who stand when everyone else falls." The crew cheered. It was quiet, disciplined, controlled. But it was there. The belief, the determination, the will to win. The Kethrin horde had never faced anything like what was about to hit them. They had conquered through force and terror for so long that they had forgotten that some beings would fight anyway. Some beings would resist anyway. Some beings would stand against impossible odds and say no. Tomorrow the Kethrins would learn what that felt like. The signal came through on a Tuesday morning in the communications hub of the Deep Space Station, Kepler 7. Captain Helena Price was reviewing supply manifests when the alarm bells started ringing. The frequency was old, really old. Carbon dating suggested it was at least 3,000 years old, yet something had triggered it awake in the vast emptiness between the stars. She set down her tablet and walked to the center of the communications room. Everyone was staring at their screens, their faces showing confusion and concern. The message decoded slowly, piece by piece. Helena watched as words began appearing on the main screen. It was a distress call, and it was asking for humanity specifically, not asking for any civilization, not asking for any advanced species, but asking for humans, for the Deathworlders, for the people from the violent, chaotic, dangerous planet called Earth. Helena read the message twice. The Thrillian Coalition was under attack. They were a peaceful federation of herbivorous species who had evolved on safe, gentle worlds where the biggest threat was usually a bad harvest or a minor disagreement between their 3 member species. They had technology that made human engineering look like stone tools. They had medicine that could cure almost any disease. They had art and music and philosophy that had inspired artists across the galaxy. But they could not fight. They did not know how. The Kethrin horde was destroying them. This species had evolved as predators. They conquered through violence and dominated through force. Their warships were massive. Their weapons were devastating. And most importantly, they actually wanted to hurt people. They wanted to dominate and control and take what belonged to others. The Thrillians had never encountered anything like this before. In their history, conflicts were settled through negotiation, through compromise, through sitting down and talking about feelings and finding mutual solutions. Nobody in the Thrillian coalition had ever needed to kill another being in anger. Helena brought the message to the Council of Earth the next day. The debate started immediately. Some voices said humanity had no responsibility to help. They were just discovering space travel on their own timeline. Why should Earth risk its soldiers, its ships, its people for aliens they had never met? Others argued that if humanity did nothing, if they let a powerful hostile force conquer everything in this region of space, then it was only a matter of time before that same force came knocking on humanity's door. And when the Kethrin horde came, there would be no one to help Earth. Commander Jacob King stood up and gave a speech that shifted the entire discussion. He was an old man, scarred from 20 years of military service. He spoke quietly, but everyone listened. He said that humanity's strength was not in technology. Other species had better weapons. Other species had better ships. Other species had better medicine and better art and better everything. But humans had something else. Humans had the will to protect others. Humans had the courage to stand against impossible odds. Humans could look into the face of something that wanted to destroy them and say no, not today, not ever. Not if we can do anything to stop it. He said that if humanity turned away from the Thrillians now, they would be betraying everything that made them human. They would be choosing comfort over justice. They would be accepting that might makes right. And that, Commander King said, was not what human beings did. The vote was close, but it passed. Earth would respond. Captain Helena Price was given command of the operation. She assembled a team of the best officers in the human navy. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was her tactical specialist, a young man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He had grown up on a colony world where resources were scarce and danger was constant. Nothing scared him much. Engineer Alice Foster joined the team. She was brilliant with machines and systems. She could look at broken equipment and see exactly how to fix it, exactly how to improve it, exactly how to push it beyond what anyone thought was possible. Dr. Fiona Hayes was the lead combat strategist. She had studied every war in human history, every battle, every conflict. She understood how humans thought and moved and fought, and she understood how to turn that knowledge into victory. They also brought Dr. Raymond Cole, a psychologist who specialized in trauma and recovery. No one understood why he was coming, until they realized that humans would be working alongside aliens for the first time in significant numbers. These aliens would be terrified. They would be traumatized. They would have experienced things no peaceful being should ever experience. They would need help processing what was happening to them. They would need someone who understood how fear worked and how to help people move past it. The HMS Sovereign was a warship unlike anything the humans had built before. It was massive. It was heavily armored. It carried weapon systems that could devastate entire fleets. The crew was handpicked. Every person on that ship knew that they might not come home. Every person on that ship had volunteered anyway. Helena stood on the bridge as they prepared for launch. She looked at the crew around her and saw determination in their faces. She saw fear too, but that was okay. Fear was natural. Fear kept you sharp. Fear kept you focused. Fear kept you alive. The message from the Thrilians came again just hours before launch. There was desperation in it now. More worlds had fallen. More people had been killed. The Kethran horde was not slowing down. They were accelerating. They were moving faster, striking harder, crushing anything that tried to resist. The Thrilian coalition was running out of time. Helena made the call to leave immediately. The Sovereign's engines hummed to life. The massive ship pulled away from the dock. The crew worked through their launch protocols with mechanical precision. Everything had to be perfect. There could be no mistakes. There could be no delays. As Earth grew smaller and smaller on the view screen, Helena felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Thousands of soldiers were counting on her. The Thrilian coalition was counting on her. Humanity's reputation was counting on her. She thought about Commander King's words about justice and courage and standing against tyranny. She looked at her team, at their focused faces and determined eyes, and she knew that they would do what needed to be done. They would travel to the far side of known space. They would face an enemy that had never known defeat, and somehow, against all odds, against all probability, they would find a way to save a people who could not save themselves. The ship jumped to hyperspace. Earth vanished behind them. There was no going back now. There was only forward. There was only victory or defeat. There was only retribution.